my husband is going to hurt her.
Police, we have a warrant. Open up. Police, we have a warrant. Open up.
In days past, the most expedient entry method was often destructive in nature.
Police officer, we have a warrant. Open up.
Advances in both lockpicking and the science of rapid entry techniques have now made it possible for many locking devices to be compromised in a matter of seconds without any damage to the lock itself. Superpicking is the ultimate lockpick video. In the next hour, you will view a complete lockpicking course as taught by one of the true masters in the art of non-destructive entry, as well as receive a unique look at the miracle of electronic lockpicking from John Hancock, the inventor of the electronic lockpick.
Hello, my name is Ronald Reed, and I'm a locksmith. I pick locks, I teach classes in lockpicking, I'm a certified instructor, and I have even won a contest or two picking locks, like the California Locksmithing Association's lockpicking contest. Today I'm going to show you how to pick some locks and demonstrate some of the new picks, like the Cobra II, the Electro Pick, and the new Cottonmouth. And basically go over the points of how to rake locks, how to use the one pin at a time method, and several other methods for picking locks. Okay, first we have a lock here. The reason that you can pick a lock is based on how the lock works. When you insert the key into the lock, it's like the last piece of a puzzle. What's happening there are individual pins. In this case, in this lock, there's 4 pins, and each pin rests in the little V grooves, the bittings on the key. Each pin has a break in it that occurs at a particular height in the lock. The key is cut to different heights to correspond to the break in each of the pins. When you insert the key, it raises all of the pins to just the right height so that the lock can turn. If you have the wrong key or you're not picking it correctly, you will have raised one or more of the pins too high or too little, and they will jam the mechanism and prevent the lock from turning. So when we pick the lock, what we're doing, hopefully, is lifting each individual pin so that it comes to its shear line or the break line in the lock at least long enough so that we can turn the lock a little and get it started to turn. That's the concept of picking the lock. When you are picking locks, you have to use several different items. The main things you have are a torque wrench, also called a tension wrench, that goes into the lock and applies turning to the core, the same as if you had inserted a key and you were trying to turn it. What that does is it puts torque, or tension, as some people say, on the lock mechanism. Then you have the other tool that you'll need is a lock pick. Now, normally, as a locksmith will probably carry, or at least buy initially, or make or whatever, a large set of picks. But after a while, most locksmiths that I know find the 2 or 3 favorites that they prefer the most and tend to stick with those unless they have an unusual situation and need some special quality that one that they don't normally use has. I'll show you my favorites and show you some of my favorite techniques and basically give you an idea of how to do this. For this video, we have made up a special plastic shelled lock so that you can see the actual pins operating. It may be made out of plastic, but it actually works, and you can see how the pins go up and down as the key comes in and out, or the picks come in and out, and lifts them to the shear line. You can pick locks in many different ways. You can individually go into the lock and pick the individual pins, one pin at a time. You can use a raking method where you slide into the lock in and out rapidly and basically vibrate or jump the pins into place. There's the manual method of vibrating the locks with the gun that was the basic concept of which was invented by Houdini, which works quite well. And there's also the new methods that use the electronic picks that vibrate them a lot faster than you can vibrate them manually. I feel that these and several other variations on these methods are all very valuable methods for locksmiths to have available, because you're more likely to succeed if you have more methods available to you to do the job, and you'll be more likely to make money and have a more successful time picking locks if you've got a method available to you that works on a particular lock. I think that after you've done this for a while, you'll find out that each lock is a very individual item, and each one has a fastest way to get it open. And you won't know for sure which the fastest way will be to open up a particular lock that you happen to be presented with until you've tried several of them. Well, we're going to insert the key into this lock, and you can see as the various cuts in the key go underneath the pins, they lifts up and compresses the spring that holds the top pin. And when we turn it, if you look carefully, you can see that the top pin's sort of wiggling because the spring is still compressing them against the cylinder. You should turn it. When you put a pick into the lock, the idea is that you're going in and you're lifting up the individual tumblers to try to get them up to exactly the same height as the key would have lifted them up to. Now, when you put in a raking type pick, what you're doing is instead of lifting up each one individually, you're raking past them rapidly and hoping that they will catch the shear line and stay up. When you put in a gun, you're trying to knock them up above the shear line just momentarily. When when you use the electronic pick, you're doing the same thing very, very rapidly. This is a specially constructed plastic lock so that you can see the operation of the upper pins and springs. It, however, is a real lock and does actually work. If you put the key in it, you can see how the pins you can see the tops of the pins, and you can see how they have to all be exactly level so that the lock will actually turn. With the top pin being pushed down with the springs from on top, if any one of those pins is either too low, the top pin goes down into the core and jams it so that it can't move, or if it's raised too high, the bottom pin comes up into the shell and prevents the core from turning. Now when I insert the hook pick, I'm trying to raise the tumblers one at a time. The idea is once I have them all raised, when each one gets to the shear line, I'm trying to get it to stick at the shear line so that I can go find the next pin and lift it to its shear line. Once I have them all sticking at the shear line, it magically opens. There you go. Now, one of the important things to know about locks is that there is always a first pin and a last pin that need to be picked. And it rarely is in like the first pin in the lock. I believe in this lock it's about the third or fourth pin that is the tight pin when you start out. And you have to pick that one first. Once you get it, the fifth pin in this particular lock is the last pin that needs to be picked. If I've overlifted it, I have to release torque on it and start over again. Because once you've gotten just one lifted too high, the lock will never, ever open. Also, you can hear an audible click as each one gets to its shear line. There we go again. Anyway, that's how you pick this lock one pin at a time. When you're raking the lock, you have to go a little faster in sort of an in and out motion. And oftentimes that you can open a lock a lot faster with this method than you can with the more precise one pin at a time method. When you're using the gun, it's very, very important when using any of the needle methods of opening the gun, the lock, vibrating methods of one sort and another, that you hold the lock, the needle absolutely steady. And allow the vibrating to do the work of opening the lock. When you're inserting the needle into the lock, you want to go all the way to the back of the lock and then back off a little bit, because if your needle hits the back of the lock, in this case my lock has no back so it's okay, but if it hits the back of the lock, hitting the back of the lock absorbs the vibrating action, and that energy is getting wasted. That one, as you can see, opens the lock very, very fast. You also want to avoid having the needle contact the the walls of the lock as much as possible, because all they'll do is lose the energy trying to scrape the sides of the lock. When what you want it to do is to transmit the energy straight up into the pins. Now, another very important point is if the needle is put in crooked, it will overlift some of the pins, and you'll never get the lock open. If you overlift even one of the pins, say the first pin in the lock has a very deep cut in it. If you tilt it up like this, the lock will never open, because what you've done is you've brought that first pin above the shear line. There's several popular picks. One of the most popular is the hook pick, where you lift each tumbler individually. There's the rake with several bumps that you vibrate in and out rapidly, causing the tumblers to jump up and down into position. And the individual diamond pick, which does essentially the same thing, but gives you a little more control because there's only one bump for you to be manipulating at a time. There's a variety of different kinds of picks. There's ones with really nice handles on them that give you something to hold on to. There's others that are just stamped out of spring steel. They're a little less comfortable to hold unless you make your own handles or attach a handle to them. There's picks that are made out of stainless, which can be made a little skinnier than the ones made out of spring steel, but they're not quite as strong. They tend to bend. On the other hand, they don't tend to break as often. There's one of my favorites that used to be made. It has all sorts of different picks in the handle, and fits nicely in your pocket. However, there's lots of other ways. If you need to carry them around in a pinch, there's even this new set that is an emergency set you can have in your wallet, in with your credit cards, and it sort of holds it together by glue, and you can use the case as a handle. Very clever idea. This is the snap gun pick. The concept for the way this one works was invented by Houdini, I understand. And the basic idea, the way it works, is when you click the handle, the needle hits the pin and causes it to bump against the pin that's resting on top of it, and the pin that's resting on top jumps just like a billiard ball up out of the way for just a second. And in that split second, when it's in midair and is above the shear line, you put the torque wrench or tension wrench in and turn the lock, and that's how you open the lock when you're using a vibration type tool like this one. About the new electronic picks. This is the Cobra II. It's my favorite. It's perhaps a little more expensive and a little more heavy duty, and does a very good job. What happens when you push the button on this is the needle vibrates very, very fast and does essentially the same thing, but it does it quicker, and in many cases will open locks that none of the other methods will open. Each lock operates on its own principles, and in fact, any one of these methods may fail on a particular lock. Besides the Cobra II, the other tools on the market are the Electro Pick and the new Cottonmouth. And again, they work on the same principle. They vibrate the pin, and oftentimes in the process of vibrating the pin, I firmly believe that they also loosen up the lock just a little bit, allowing it to open more judiciously. Right now we're going to try opening some of these locks. They're normal run-of-the-mill locks like you'd normally run into out in the field. Brand new out of the box. Some very common names like Weiser, Dexter, Westlock, Schlage. Now, not every tool will open every lock every time, but we're going to try this new Cobra II and see just what kind of results we get and how quickly we get them. Let's do the Weiser here. Let's do the Dexter. Let's do the Westlock. See how it goes. Let's do the Schlage. See how it goes. Got that one. And that one in record time. Now for the Schlage C brass tumbler. Here's an alarm switch lock. Got it. And we got a cabinet lock here. Got that one. Got the imported lock here. Okay, let's try out the Welsh and see how well that goes. Okay, let's try the Ilko and see how well we do with the Ilko. Quick set here. Whoa. Okay, let's see how the Yale opens up. That's a venerable name in locks. And voila. The Russ one. This one is one of the more precise locks around. Let's see how we do this time. And the imitation Schlage C. Few seconds per lock, and we opened almost every lock on this door. Okay, I'm going to try opening some of these conventionally and just see how long that takes. Wasn't too long. Okay, let's try the Dexter, see what happens with it. Something you have to remember when you're picking locks is that every time you pick it, the lock is actually a little different than the time you worked it before, because the process of picking can actually wear away little pieces of metal and change the characteristics of the lock. So whereas you may have been able to open it yesterday, today it may not open quite the same. And see, you can never be 100% sure exactly how long something's going to take. Well, this one's taking longer to pick conventionally. You might want to try combining the two techniques sometimes. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, let's go on and see just what happens with something else here. So Westlock will be more amenable. Again, one of my favorite techniques is to switch between one and another method. Well, one of the problems with locksmithing is you seem to end up on your knees a lot working on these things. There we go. Got that one. On a wafer lock, you oftentimes have half the trouble is deciding which direction it turns, so you pick it in the right direction to open it. Okay, we've covered some of the details about picks. Now let's take a look at some advanced tips about picking locks. There's several different kinds of picks. Some of them have fancy handles that make them easier to hold. Other that obviously a lot less expensive is one without a handle. There's several other brands and types that you can pick. My favorite has a good sturdy handle to help me hold it without my hand getting tired and sore. Something else that's very important about a pick is after you get a commercially made pick, it's very, very handy if you take a fine file or a smooth grinding stone or something and just take the sharp edges. This is an impressioning file. Take the sharp edges off of the pick, because when you put it in the lock, what happens is if you have a sharp edge on the pick, and you can feel it, it feels very, very sharp when you run your finger over it. You want it to be smooth. That sharp edge scrapes against the wall of the lock, and a lot of the energy that you're using to try to pick the lock is being expended scraping brass off the inside of the lock. And that's very counterproductive, and it takes away from your ability to do a good job. This is especially important when you're working with one of the electronic needles. I really recommend that you have a nice smooth one. If you don't, when you pull it out of the lock, you'll see it just coated in brass dust, and you will have lost a lot of your advantage that you have when you're trying to pick the lock. You have given that up to the process of scraping the inside of the lock rather than transmitting the energy directly to the pins. Several different things that help when you're trying to pick the lock would include the placement of the torque wrench or the tension wrench. When I'm putting it in, right now I'm putting it into the top side of the keyway. If you can put it in at the bottom, if you've got room though, oftentimes the top is the best place to put it. As you'll notice with my favorite wrench here, it's got a very short span. That's mostly so that it won't go into the lock. When you buy a commercial one, oftentimes they have a very long span, and this part here is so long that you can't put it all the way into the lock, and it's more likely to fall out. You don't want it to be too far in the lock, because if it touches the first pin in the lock when you insert it, you will not be able to as easily pick that first pin, because you're touching it affects your ability to lift it and have it stay in the proper position. Okay. Also, by putting the wrench in the lock at the top rather than the bottom of the keyway, it gives you a lot more room to maneuver your pick inside the lock. If you put it in the bottom, you have to raise your pick up to clear the wrench. In the process of raising your pick up higher to clear the wrench, oftentimes you will end up overlifting one or more pins in the lock. If you overlift any of the pins in the lock won't open. So it's the proper placement of the torque or tension wrench is very, very important. Also, if you put it in the upper portion, what's actually happening is you're spreading your torque across the core, and you're putting it right down the center of the core instead of putting it at the bottom. The torque moves diagonally from the bottom here to the top of the other side of the lock. And what that adversely affects the clearance that's available between the plug and the shell. And that clearance is actually why you're able to pick the lock at all. If there was no clearance at all, you probably wouldn't be able to pick the lock. Fortunately, you can't make a lock with no clearance, so that's the only reason we're able to pick these locks, is they have to put the clearance in because the lock has to turn, and the clearance is what allows the core to turn. That's also one of the reasons that some brands of locks, say like Schlage, are more difficult to pick than other brands of locks, say like Kwikset. And that is because the more precise locks are more difficult because they have less clearance. Okay, when you're raking it in and out, it's important that you go lightly and you hold very light tension. When you're doing one pin at a time, you need a lot more tension, I believe. When you're using a vibrating gun, you need more tension. When you're raking, you use less tension. You use less tension when you're raking or using a vibrating gun. Oops, there it went again. When you are picking locks for a customer, when the customer is present, it's very important that you act very professionally. If you do that, it's much more likely that he'll feel comfortable with paying you when you're done. It's a common problem that people feel very uncomfortable about having their lock open. This is the big, strong lock that is protecting them and their valuables and their loved ones, and you've got to treat it with a certain amount of respect, and your attitude really should be right when you're picking the lock. And your whole approach. You explain to the customer what you're doing if that's necessary, and like that, because you will invariably get a lot of like nervous reactions that people have. They'll comment that James Bond could have done it quicker and things like that. It's very important that you have worked out some of your answers to these things that people will come up with. You explain that they don't do it like that in the movies. They didn't write my script that way. You do something to defuse the situation, to make the customer feel a little more comfortable. Some people use humor, and I recommend that you work out a pattern that works for you. Anyway, sometimes you've got to do something, because you may pick the lock really, really quickly.
Is it really true that most locks can be picked open in a few seconds? Let's take a more in-depth look at the art of electronic lock manipulation from a gentleman who should know, the inventor of the electronic lockpick.
I'm John Hancock for the Intelligence Group. Some years ago, an intelligence agency approached our office with a request to build an electronic lockpick that would compromise locks for field agents with little or no experience. The result was the Cobra electronic pick. I'm going to give you an example this afternoon of what can be done with the electronic pick. Let's start with one of the most common, the Weiser. There's a couple things to understand and know. There's several different types of tension tools you can use with the electronic pick. One of the secrets of the pick is the ability for the pick to move back and forth freely. This is what compromises the lock quickly. If you have an oversized tension tool in the lock, it won't move. Simple as that, it won't open. So we use different ones for different keyways. Let's give it a try with a standard tension tool. That lock is picked. Now, one of the secrets in using the electronic pick, and most people don't realize this when they first start out, I'm going to put the tension tool back in. Get it to the bottom, use very, very light tension. If you use anything more than light, you'll simply bind the pins and the lock will not open. The second thing is, instead of sticking the pick straight in, we do want to stick it in, go all the way to the back, turn it slightly in this direction. Because you're compromising the cylinder by turning it slightly to the right, you're then lining your pick straight up with the pins as you go to pick. Let me go ahead and stick this in and I'll show you. Now, instead of being straight on, I'm turning it just slightly. That gives me a free access to the pins. Okay, that's open. We said 7 seconds. In reality, it took about 2 seconds. Let's go on down here to another common lock, the West lock. All right, same situation. Get our pick in, put it towards the back. I'm not making contact, that's why I'm not getting it. So let me make sure I get good contact. It's picked. Let's go on to a cabinet lock. This is a standard cabinet lock. You'd find it in just about anything from filing cabinets to drawers. Now this is not a pin tumbler lock, it's a wafer lock. It picks just that fast. This is a standard alarm lock. Again, it's a wafer lock. Now this is a little unusual because we're turning the pick on an angle. So you've got to work with that. Picked. Let's take another lock. Well, let's take the standard quick set. This lock is found on probably 85% of all locks, all doors today. Sometimes just getting the pick in is harder than opening the lock. Okay, I've got it to the back. I pull it out just a little bit so it doesn't bind. Just that fast. That's what, 2 seconds? Okay, we'll go over here to another common lock, the Yale. Picks just that fast. Let's talk about the best of the best. This is the Cobra electronic lockpick. What makes it superior to everything else on the market is that it's made from scratch. It's machined out of aluminum. All the parts are precision. Everything is very, very close tolerance. It was originally designed for law enforcement work, and it's intended for many, many years of service. It has a removable, and this is very important, rechargeable battery pack. We also have what is known as a hot pack. Besides the rechargeable pack, it's also rechargeable, but it lasts a lot longer. It's recharged in the end like so. In the field, if you're in a foreign country or if your batteries go dead, whatever the situation happens to be, you can replace the batteries on this using standard batteries. It has a guard so that it won't accidentally turn on if it's in a briefcase or a toolkit or whatever. Like I say, it's beautifully machined. It also has recessed controls so that you control the striking action of the pick. That's the Cobra. The next unit that's out is made by a company which we won't mention now. They took a standard Black & Decker screwdriver and they turned it into a kind of electronic pick. It does work, but it falls apart. That's the big problem with it. It's very, very, very poor construction. There's no tolerances in it at all. It has one bearing, and because of the vibration, this starts to fall off after a while. It just does not hold up well. A company approached us, and they wanted a pick built using the same basic designs, in other words, a rechargeable handle here, and that's when the Cottonmouth was born. Their specifications were very simple. They said, we don't want something that's going to fall apart on the guy that buys it. We want something that will last. It may not be made from scratch in terms of the Cobra, but we want it to last and give good service over a number of years. So we took our basic design from the Cobra and produced an inexpensive alternative to the Cobra. The pick is extremely long. That's very important because you can get into, it's long and thin. You can get into just about every kind of lock, and you can, of course, clip it back if you want to with a pair of dikes if you have a specific need on a smaller lock or if you need to grind it down more. And inside, you'll see the ball bearing arm attached by two rods that hold it in place and two lock nuts in the inside. It's nice and tight. It's not loose. That's very, very important because if your pick doesn't have good striking action and it doesn't have some sort of precision because this goes so fast, you simply won't open locks. Also, it has permanent mounted screws in the bottom. This means that when you put your pick in place, and remember using a lot of striking action with this, it's not going to fall out. In the other unit, it simply, after a very short period of time, the screws fall right out of the thing and the pick flies off into the air, hopefully not into your eye. And those are the main differences.
Thank you for watching this tape. Remember that no single tool or